don't worry, we're already doing FinOps. And then I dig into it a bit further, and they had just bought a tool, and that's their solution to doing FinOps. So, people, process, and technology are part of the solution here in terms of FinOps. So it's not just a one thing. You can go out and buy a tool and say, yeah, we're done. We've seen a customer who spent lots of money on a tool, and they were very happy at the beginning, but 3 years in, they just weren't seeing the return.
Before you really invest in a tool, it's important to understand where your gaps are and what you're trying to achieve with that tool. Really understand your problem statements. What problems are you trying to solve with a tool? If you understand what your problem is, you probably have a good understanding of what the cost of that problem is. And that's going to help you identify the ROI of that tool. If it's a $10 problem, you don't want a $10,000 tool.
They made the choice to go out and buy a tool, and they were very happy with that in year one. But because they hadn't clearly identified what goals they wanted to achieve from the tool, that return on investment totally disappeared. You're trying to solve a problem that's already been solved. They're not coming at it from a unique angle. So be careful. There are a lot of tool vendors out there that are maybe not as mature as you need.
Welcome to the Invero Show. Join the Invero team and our esteemed clients and partners as we demystify the complexities of Microsoft Cloud systems. We hope to help you accelerate your cloud journey and maximize the value of your investment with Microsoft. And now, on with the show.
All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining the Invero Show, where we've got our Spotlight series focused on FinOps. We're doing these sessions regularly because we've got a lot to share on this topic. For this particular episode, we're going to talk FinOps tools, when and why they work well. We're going to zip through our agenda here. I'll cover off some quick introductions right now. My name is Shawn Ambrose. I'm part of the leadership team here at Invero, and I'm the host of the show. I'm joined here with my colleagues, Craig Slack, who's our founder and CTO at Invero, and Stephanie, who leads our licensing practice and helps us with FinOps overall. As I said, we're going to dive into these three every episode has three FinOps topics. Today is all about tools. We're going to dive into that a little more deeply. Then we're going to talk about some of the customer emails and feedbacks and questions that we see. Craig's going to dive into a great client use case and example all around tools. And then Craig's also going to provide this ongoing industry benchmark for everyone to kind of see what do those trends lines look like. And then we'll wrap it up with how different companies are helping make some progress in terms of their overall maturity in FinOps. So let's get a discussion here, folks. We're going to talk about tools. Tools seem to come up all the time. There's often this, we see it, this perception or maybe even a misperception of, do I just need a tool? And if I just had a better tool, will that solve all the problems, right? So let's start off with just kind of navigating through these. Craig, I'd like to start with you. Can you just talk a bit about why are tools not always the answer? Why is that not the silver bullet? And why do you need a bit more process and structure in place before just throwing a tool at it?
For sure. Yeah. I can't even count how many times I've had clients that I've talked to about FinOps, and they tell me, don't worry, we're already doing FinOps. And then I dig into it a bit further, and they had just bought a tool, and that's their solution to doing FinOps. So I just want to kind of clarify that, that's a big piece of it. Your tooling helps with automation, helps to generate the reports and so on. But without the underlying processes and the people side of things, you're missing the third leg of the stool, so to speak, right? Because you got, people, process, and technology are part of the solution here in terms of FinOps. So it's not just a one thing. You can go out and buy a tool and say, yeah, we're done. Tools will help with, a lot of low-hanging fruit up front, identifying cost savings and so on. But without the processes and kind of the people side of things in place, you're going to lose that visibility, and you're going to actually ultimately see your cost savings achieved decline over time. And we'll actually get into this with a customer example here, where we've seen a customer who spent lots of money on a tool, and they were very happy at the beginning, but 3 years in, they just weren't seeing the return. So ultimately, the tool will help you with certain things, but you need the processes and to be able to attribute that business value that you're getting out of that cloud spend. That's ultimately where you need that people and process side of things. The tool is not going to be able to tell you what the value is that the organization's getting for that spend. It'll just be able to help you report on it and where that spend is going.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So I think what I'm hearing there is tools are important. We're not saying don't have a tool. Absolutely. Or tools. It's just that blend or that integration of the tools and the people in the process. Steph, maybe you can just chat a bit here about. Well, I want to get to when the right time is in a moment, but before we go there, I just want to chat a little bit about like the what you see in terms of blending between tools and then the people side and how to bring that together to make it all work.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of native tools that should be used to start out with. And
Mm,
so, I mean, identifying who should be accessing what functionality. Some of the tools are things like Azure Advisor, Azure Cost Management, and Azure. The comparable kind of cost management tools like Google Cloud Recommender, AWS Trusted Advisor. So interacting with those tools, you're going to want to have the right users and the right stakeholders to utilize what information they need from those tools first. So it's identifying the right people that's going to be in there. In Azure Advisor, for example, taking a look at end of service dates for all of your resources and accessing some of this information. Granting access to your finance people doesn't actually make sense for some of these tools, for example. So you really want to align the right people with the right resources in your environment.
right. Okay. Thanks, Steph. And Craig, maybe back to you on what are some of the things that we call them best practices that you'd see on more of the people side that complement what the tools are doing?
Yeah, so it does start with education. I think there's a lot of misconceptions of what FinOps is. A
Mm,
lot of people jump straight to it's about cost optimization, and that is one component, and it's an important component, but it's not the only component. So we follow the FinOps Foundation, their FinOps framework, and it has 22 capabilities across four different domains of FinOps practice areas. And that cost optimization piece is just one of those 22. So on the people side, really what's missing is just that education and awareness of what FinOps is. And then secondly, drawing that accountability or driving that accountability to the consumers of those cloud services. So if, as an example, you've got a departmental application that is consuming a certain amount of cloud spend, you want to be able to carve that out and make the individuals driving that spend aware of where their dollars are going and where the overall company's dollars in terms of cloud spend is going. And you can't do that with purely just a tool. You have to have that awareness in the business group or at least some sort of IT representative that's sharing that information and making that awareness there so that that accountability can be driving as, say, for example, that departmental application starts consuming more and more over time. Then ultimately that business owner who's driving that increased consumption is being asked why it's growing, and it's only up to them and the business overall to determine if that is driving a positive return for the company or if it's actually a negative return.
right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that, Craig. So it's a lot about that clarity, which often is going to go a little deeper, and that awareness. It's going to go deeper beyond just a tool. Yeah. Those next, the bottom two questions really go hand in hand of like, when's the right time to invest in the tool and why pick one over the other? And Steph, you touched on a little bit about there's some tools that are no charge, that are inherent in that cloud service, whether that's Azure, AWS, or GCP. But let's start with when's the right time to think about investing in a tool, whether that's an included kind of freeware tool or something that's third party that the client would actually have to pay money for. When would be the right time to start to think about, okay, we should think about it like investing in a tool here?
Yeah, I think before you really invest in a tool, it's important to understand where your gaps are and what you're trying to achieve with that tool. So until you've identified and exhausted all of the native tools in your cloud provider's environment, that would obviously be kind of the first recommendation there is to do a little bit of investigation and really understand your problem statements. What problems are you trying to solve with a tool? That could be, I just don't understand understand my forecasting, it just doesn't seem to work very well in Azure. Cost management is something I commonly hear. So if you have this pain point, this use case for something specific, that's when you want to start investigating tools, because then you'll actually have a good idea of what your requirements are, and it's going to be just a lot more easy to evaluate which tool is the right fit. There are so many options out there. There are very, very specific tools that solve one problem, and then there are some tools that pitch themselves as like that one-stop shop where you can beef up your cost optimizations and you can beef up your reporting, and it will help with anomaly management. So really understanding where the current included tools are falling flat, where your current processes are falling flat, that's going to be a really important way to start figuring out what the right tool is going to be.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. So I think what I'm hearing there is leverage the native tools to start because they're included, so to speak. So get everything you can out of those, and then take that moment to look and go, okay, is there do we have gaps still, or is this achieving everything we're looking to achieve? Which is really back to Craig. You touched on the FinOps Foundation framework of domains and capabilities, and looking at that and trying to understand in the business where are we and where are we trying to get to, and how much is that tool actually helping. Before we move on to the next component of the show here, the episode, maybe we'll just finish off a bit on why one tool over the other. And you both have already kind of touched on it of it depends based on what you're trying to accomplish. But is there anything more you can add to that of thinking about, especially the paid tools, of why somebody might go down one path versus another path? Because you also said there's a lot of them out there, and that can be a bit overwhelming.
Yeah, and another interesting thing to note is a lot of the paid tools will have a free flavor of it, a lighter version that you can trial, that you can install in your environment to get a feel for it. And as much as interacting with that tool, you can just get a bit of comfortability with it and see if how it operates is what would feel nice for how you want to manage your tooling. But again, it's also going to give you a good indication of how the support with the company works. And did they reach out and say, let's get this installed, let's answer some questions, let's do some training? You can really get a good feel if these tool providers are going to be a good partner for you or just an order taker, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to what Steph touched on earlier is the key is identifying what's the problem you're trying to solve with the tool rather than starting with the tool first and getting excited about the bells and whistles that it has. Implementing a tool just for the sake of saying you need a tool and you pick one that looks good, it may not fit your business processes or it may not fit and solve the problem that you're trying to solve. And back to your question, Shawn, like what's really why a company would pick one product over another. It could be those specialized areas like Steph was mentioning. There's some tools that are very specific, like there's tools that are just for identifying cost or managing your cost within a Kubernetes environment, for example. And there's other ones that are wider spread than that. Another reason is automation. As you mature your FinOps practices, you're going to find more and more things that you want to be doing, and addressing the recommendations maybe a tool is giving or being able to chase down anomalies as they occur. Doing that manually as you're maturing may become a limiting factor because you don't necessarily have a large team to go and chase these and are responsible for FinOps. So tools can bring that level of automation where somebody is still vetting that, yes, we want to implement this recommendation, and then you can click a button that says remediate and it does it all automatically behind the scenes. So there's various different reasons, but I think it all really follows along with where a company is at on the maturity level. So starting, low maturity, kind of in that crawl stage, you're going to want to start with those free tools, whether it be the first party tools from the big hyperscalers, or there's a lot of other free tools. Steph mentioned even free trials of third party products. So going down that path first, figure out then where your gaps are, and then identify, okay, what are the things that we want to get more out of a tool from? And then as you mature more and more, you'll add more and more requirements to that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
perfect. Go ahead,
And with
Steph.
that as well, if you understand what your problem is, you probably have a good understanding of what the cost of that problem is. And that's going to help
Sure.
you identify the ROI of that tool. If it's a $10 problem, you don't want a $10,000 tool.
100%.
Yeah, really, really good point. I think part of what I take away from this discussion here would be ideally, like look at FinOps Foundation framework in terms of domains and capabilities, go through some process to understand what the target maturity is in each of those, and then look back to both the tools and the people processes of how is it you can tackle that. So great discussion on tools. Thanks. Okay, let's roll on here. We've got a couple of customer emails that have come in where customers are asking us questions or looking for some feedback or some insights on here. So Steph, first one over to you here. Why don't you frame the question and provide an answer here?
Yeah, thanks. So this is a question we get, like, why would I adopt a tool? What are these tools going to be good for? Where should I aim towards having this help me? So again, we already had a pretty lengthy discussion about why you would really want to understand what your gaps are. There's definitely some reporting gaps in most of these big cloud providers where the data they are providing is not always easy to navigate. And especially if you have multiple clouds, that could really be the reason for adopting a tool, just to have some of this reporting standardized in one place. So cost reporting, and a lot of the tools are really good at cost reporting, especially navigating that over multiple clouds. Also recommending cost savings. If that's an area that is a struggle, these tools do a really good job of suggesting optimizations, not just on cost savings, but also architectural optimizations, things like that, performance related optimizations that could really save a lot on costs. Alerting and cost bursting, and really just being able to visualize your costs as it relates to resources. I've seen a lot of demos of some slick tools that can really help with that visualization to really get that straight in the architect's minds, or whoever those appropriate stakeholders are that really need to understand the relationship between specific groups and resources and those costs. That's where some tools can really come in helpful, and providing some alerts for when you get outside some of those expectations. But again, some of where they fall short is unless you actually have your environment set up correctly with cost allocations and tagging and your hierarchy structure and perhaps landing zones, if you just don't have a good environment to start with, the best tool is not going to help you fix some of those underlying problems. So
Yeah.
really looking to what's under the hood, what changes can we make to our environment to maybe even avoid having to go to a tool if that's where things are falling short.
Yeah, for sure. Totally right. If your foundation is a mess, you can't just put a band-aid on it and hope it's better, and then the tool would just be the band-aid, and you're probably just going to be wasting a bunch of money and cycles on it. Yeah, great discussion overview here. Craig, I know we got one more question. Why don't we dive into that? Just a direct question of, well, what FinOps tool would you recommend? How would you answer that?
That's a loaded question, to be honest, but we
Yeah.
do get asked it a lot. And it's surprising how many options there are out there, and we've followed this even since the early days. Some of the tools that came on before even first party tools were available, before Azure Cost Management as an example. I can remember the days we had to write our own reports and so on. But as a systems integrator ourselves, we don't necessarily recommend one specific product over another. We've kind of already touched on this, but we always recommend start with the first party tools. Don't go and spend a big part of your budget implementing a tool that may not solve a problem for you if you don't know what that problem is. So start off with those first party tools, and then you'll find out you want more than what it can provide. And that's where you're going to then be able to come up with your list of recommendations or requirements for what you want to actually get out of a tool. And then be sure you're clear on what those requirements are and what the problem is that you're trying to solve with a tool, because then you can go to market and properly evaluate all the providers out there and compare them against what you're trying to solve. So investing in a tool set at the point where you've got some level of FinOps practices, FinOps processes in place, and you've also got somebody that can administer the tool, because there's no point in having a tool sit there and generate, reports or alerts that nobody's got time to chase down as well. So there's a few things you have to kind of think about, and you don't put the cart before the horse and trying to, implement a tool because you're getting some political pressure to do something about Azure or cloud costs growing out of control, and just saying solving the problem with the tool. It's not necessarily going to solve your problems.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Craig. So start with the first party tools, and also think about ownership too. Like, you raise a really good point. In the FinOps Foundation framework, it recommends that the client side needs somebody who's the owner, the FinOps practitioner. And so how are they going to be able to care and feed for that tool? So great discussion on tools and the do's and don'ts and the whens and the hows and the whys. To our audience, we appreciate these questions, and we welcome more. And everyone in these episodes will unpack a couple of questions and do our best to provide as much detail based on the question it was. So for those that may not be watching this and are just listening in audio mode only, the email address that we'd ask you to send those questions to is finopsready@inverodigital.com. So, all right, let's keep this rolling here. Craig, I know you were going to unpack a customer example of a customer that's been using a tool, and kind of the pros and cons of that, and the navigation of tool to people processes, and just kind of unpack that. So over to you here, Craig.
Great. Yeah. So this is a large company, energy services company in North America that is spending quite a bit on cloud, but they went out and invested in this tool. We're not going to name the specific tool because it's not about the tool itself, but they were spending $100,000 a year on a multi-year contract for a third-party tool. And they, at the point that we're talking about here for this case study, they were actually in year 3 and they were coming up for renewal on that tool. So in the early days when they first implemented the tool, they saw great savings. It was more than paying for itself. Spend $100,000 in a year and they were saving $500,000. So great, that's a good return on investment. Fast forward to year 3, and they were starting to see that they weren't getting those same level of returns. Maybe they're going to save $10,000 here or there, and their question is, well, why spend $100,000 to only save a tenth of that in this example? So it just got them thinking about, all right, there's maybe something more we can do. They actually went out to market and looked at tool options that can give them what they need, and they ultimately selected a different tool that was, they chose it for cost, but it achieved the goals as well. So they also had identified what are the specifics that they're looking for. And in this customer's case, they were more concerned about the cost optimization reasons and the reporting capabilities as opposed to any automation and so on. So the tool maybe wasn't overkill, like the other tool might have had more features that they just didn't require. But their ultimate desired end result was they did want to have some automation in the reporting capability. So being able to aggregate all this data from the different cloud spend areas, being able to identify and report on that to their organization. So and they found this tool that was a significant reduction in cost over the previous tool. So I think it's a good case study to recognize that they made the choice to go out and buy a tool, and they were very happy with that in year 1. But because they hadn't clearly identified what goals they wanted to achieve from the tool, that return on investment totally disappeared, and it forced them to look at alternatives.
I was going to say, I think that's a good look at, like, just that point of make sure you're evaluating the tools you have in place regularly as well. I was talking to another customer this morning who was expressing some frustration that they'd adopted a pretty expensive tool a few years ago, and a large provider had bought that company, took over that tool, and didn't release any updates to it. So it was just kind of stagnant, and they just didn't feel like they were getting value out of that tool anymore for that reason. Just a complete environmental outside influence that they had no control over. And so because of that, they wanted to look for a new tool. So yeah, it's just an important point to make. Make sure that that tool is working for you.
And the tools
Yeah.
landscape is ever changing too. There's new tool vendors coming out all the time.
Hmm.
Unique. I had somebody pitching a new one to me a couple weeks ago, and they were very early stages. They were a startup company, and it fell flat. Like in my opinion, I was looking at it. I'm like, okay, you're trying to solve a problem that's already been solved. They're not coming at it from a unique angle. So be careful. There are a lot of tool vendors out there that are maybe not as mature as you need. So just being aware of that.
Yeah, yeah, great. Thanks for the case study here. I think a big thing I take away from this is like the right tool that's doing the right things and giving you the right value. And as you both touched on, there's so many tools out there. And if you want the tool that does everything, you can go find it,
Mhm.
but you need to be actually doing all those things to get the value out of it. Otherwise, you probably are wasting money a little bit. And there's probably a more efficient tool if you just had specific and desired end results. Uh,
Agreed.
yeah.
Yeah.
So great discussion, Craig. I think you were going to unpack now some of the benchmark update stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So our monthly update here on FinOps benchmarks. As I mentioned earlier, we follow the FinOps Foundation's framework, which is on screen here, and it has actually just recently been updated as well. But their framework is ultimately prescribing across 22 capabilities and 4 domains what it is to be running a proper FinOps practice and what are the things you need to consider. And they've mapped it against a maturity scale that they identify as crawl, walk, run. And each of the 22 domains or 22 capabilities have a specific measures of what it means to be in a crawl versus walk versus run. So we've actually developed a process of measuring a company against these maturity levels, and we'll get into that in a second. It's our service called FinOps Ready, helping companies to get ready for FinOps or helping them to continue to mature. And we aggregate all this data into a benchmark score that we release through these sessions, and we call it our FinOps Benchmark Index. And ultimately, it's helping to identify where the industries are at across all the industries that we looked at, what scores we're seeing out there, and then ultimately where companies, if you go through the FinOps Ready process, where you can measure yourself against the general industry. So you can see the blue bar there of a 1.2. We mapped the crawl, walk, run to a 5-point scale to give a bit more granularity. And on average, across all the companies that we put through the system, we've got a score of 1.2, which is right in between the crawl and the walk stage. So it's really bordering on walk. And so that is what consistent with what we're seeing. And there are companies obviously that are well below the average and some that are well above, or not well above, some slightly above. And it's all about right sizing it to where you are today. It's not like everybody needs to say, okay, we're scoring really low and now we need to make all these investments to make sure we're at run. Because as you can see from the green bar, 2.9 out of 5 is really where the average is saying that they want to be. That's kind of their desired end state, the target rating that they want to achieve. And we collect that data during our FinOps Ready assessment process with the customers to help them zero in on what it is that they want to achieve across all the 22 capabilities. And so a 2.9 is just on the verge of the run level. And we've stated before that we don't believe achieving run is realistic for most companies. It's always something that's kind of like your North Star you're aiming for. But based on what we're seeing in the industries across multiple industries today, kind of just on the border of run. And it may take many years to get there, but it's an evolution and an ongoing process. What are companies doing and how are they developing and maturing their FinOps capabilities? There's 3 main things that we recommend all of our clients to focus on. Number 1, education. I touched on this a little bit earlier. The FinOps Foundation has great certification paths. You can go to finops.org, learn.finops.org, find out more information about it. There's even a free certification that anybody can go and take. And then there's more higher levels of certification that you can achieve. Also, following an established framework. It doesn't have to be the FinOps Foundation framework, but they are the industry standard and kind of they're setting the leading the way here in the industry here. So you can go to finops.org/framework, get more information on that. But following an established framework gives you a place to start, so you know where your gaps are on how to achieve higher levels of maturity. And then ultimately getting on that cycle of just continuous improvement, looking at your FinOps practices in a critical way and identifying where you are, where you want to go, and then prioritize those actions to actually achieve what you want to, your desired future state. So ultimately assigning somebody to take that on and lead the charge, delegating those tasks, and then track the progress over time and going through a regular review just to see that you're moving the needle forward and you're not falling backwards. So that's kind of a general like 3-step approach: education first, follow up an established framework, and then get on that process of maturing your FinOps practices over time. So just to show you an example, we've been talking about the FinOps maturity assessment called FinOps Ready that we have as a service. This is a dashboard view that every customer goes through this gets, and they ultimately get a numerical value assigned to each of the 22 capability areas within the FinOps framework. So you can see like under cost management here in the middle, you got data ingestion, allocation, reporting, analytics, and anomaly management. You can see the blue bar is where this sample data set is currently at, and where they're trying to achieve is the green bar. And that all rolls up into a final numerical number of where the customer is at today. In the top left, there's a current rating of 1.2, and that's measured against an industry benchmark that is on this scale here is 1.2, and you can see if you're above or below that benchmark. And then the green on the top right, or top left, sorry, is the overall target rating. So where you want to go, and then you can see compared to the industry, is that in line or not? So this helps to really define and identify where to make investments. Some companies that have run through this actually have a 0 as a desired end state for certain capability areas, and that's fine. It's not that everybody has to mature across all the areas. It's what's right for your organization. So along with this dashboard, the FinOps Ready clients get a report, detailed report. Usually it's about 50, 60 pages long, and it provides detailed recommendations as well as top 10 items to focus on across all these different areas. So this is just a sample of the table of contents. And here's a specific example on screen of what you would get in a specific section. So you've got first an understanding of what the capability area is about, a explanation of what the current situation is, so what the current state looks like and why that is, and then recommendations, which is kind of defining what the desired end state is. So then you got the kind of current and future, and then we close those gaps by providing specific action items recommended on how to close the gaps and how to achieve your desired end state. And then finally, we highlight the benefits. So what are the benefits you're going to achieve by implementing these action items? So, and then ultimately, the report gives you your top 10 things to focus on, which is really the low-hanging fruit. And if you're maturing anything, it's all about a slow process. You don't just jump straight to the end. You have to make those investments and work on it over time, and it's just a continuous improvement and being able to continually assess yourself of where you're at today. And as the needle moves, reassessing where you're at today and maybe where you want to go in the future changes as well. So being able to constantly manage that gap. So again, FinOps Ready is really geared towards what I've talked about here, helping companies to mature their FinOps practices, and it gets you ready for, no matter what stage of maturity you're at. You could be at a run stage and you still have areas of improvement. So, running through FinOps Ready gives you that capability to understand where you're at today and how to close those gaps. So for anybody who wants to learn more about FinOps Ready specifically, you can go to inverodigital.com/FinOps-Ready.
Yeah, that's great, Craig. Thanks so much for that. I love that service and how we're helping clients. It's a pretty lightweight engagement for clients. It doesn't take a lot a lot. It doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't take a lot of dollars. But back to like anything in your personal and professional life, if you're looking to make improvements, you need to define kind of where you're at and where you're trying to get to. The more that you have that clarity, the more you can figure out how to make the progress and know when you've actually made it, right? Kind of like saying, I want to be more fit. Well, how much more fit, right? Like, how would you figure that out? So this helps take that from a client to go, geez, I wish I was more mature in FinOps, to go, well, what does that actually mean and how would you go about it? It's really helping our clients get that level of clarity and understanding, which is awesome. Just to wrap up here, thanks so much to our audience for listening. For those that can't see, we've really got a slide that says Invero, maximizing cloud value. And at Invero, our whole mission is to help clients get the maximum value out of that investment that they make in cloud platforms. We do that through two areas. One, having deep consulting skills. Our organization is about 10 years old. We've been doing this kind of since the beginning of a lot of these cloud organizations putting up facilities in Canada in particular. But right beside that is our licensing expertise, and that allows us to be deep on cost optimizations and the overall FinOps practices and craft. So it's those two that come together for Invero's mission of helping clients maximize their cloud value. Thanks so much to our audience for listening today. I said earlier, if you have any questions at all, or you want to say, hey, feature episode, I really want you folks to talk about this, just drop us that line at finopsready@inverodigital.com. Thanks for tuning in today. Bye, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.